Okay, should you be consuming carbs? Let's talk about it. So I think right now there's such a wide range of opinions on carbohydrates. Some people are saying that you can consume 300, 400, 500 grams of carbs a day and that you should, while others are saying that you don't need any and your body can make its own glucose. And essentially we've gotten into in this camp, we've gotten into this demonization of carbs, even things like fruits and vegetables. And so we have like a lot of people falling on either side. And I think in general, just like anything with nutrition, there's so much more nuance to the conversation that we aren't talking about because, again, social media is made up of sound bites and fear mongering for clicks. And of course, obviously on social media, nobody's addressing your personal needs and what your body actually is telling you that it's going to respond best to. So I want to dive into that a little bit and the nuance of carbohydrates today, because I think it's important that you guys understand some differences within this whole conversation. So first of all, the amount of carbs that you should be consuming is dependent on you, your body, your needs, all those things. It totally depends. So if you are somebody that is experiencing symptoms like fatigue and hyperglycemia after you eat and a lot of brain fog, there's a really good chance that you aren't carb tolerant. Your ability for your body to actually efficiently use glucose and get that into your cell and for your cells to be sensitive to that insulin that actually ushers in the glucose to the cells is low. You also may, on top of that, you may be somebody that experiences a lot of bloating or cramping or even diarrhea, constipation when it comes to carb intake, and you notice that. And then you could be somebody that has some carb maldigestion or malabsorption issues. On the other hand, you're somebody that could be doing really well with carbs. So it totally depends on you as a person of how much you should consume. Now, here's the important piece of information. Carbohydrates, glucose is your body's preferred source of energy. Your brain function only functions on glucose. It needs about 130 grams of glucose or carbs a day to function. Now, the people that live in this camp that say you don't need to actually intake that glucose because our body can make it, they're not wrong. Okay. Yes, your body can take fat, protein. It can break down amino acids in order to make glucose. That process, in order for that to happen, first of all, our thyroid hormones, that conversion of inactive to active thyroid requires a lot of glucose. It requires carbs to make that conversion. So we do see a lot of thyroid function go down when we're on a no or low carb diet. On top of that, the process of converting carbohydrates, the process of converting protein and fat into carbohydrates, into glucose, it's something called glycogenesis, and it actually requires your body to increase cortisol and adrenaline in order to do that process. So a lot of the times, especially if you're a person that's already in a chronically stressed out state or burnt out from being stressed and in a stressed out place for a really long time, that being in glycogenesis, taking protein and converting those amino acids may be extremely stressful, and you may find that thyroid function plummets, hair loss, metabolism slows, you lose energy, you feel like crap over a longer period of time. So again, it totally depends. And whenever we're talking and whenever I'm dealing with someone in front of me or a client in front of me that's dealing with blood sugar issues, so carb, I would call that being lower in carb tolerance, or they have symptoms of some carb malabsorption or maldigestion, we want to look a little bit deeper and figure out what's going to be appropriate for them. What do they need to heal in order to be able to intake that glucose, in order to be able to replenish and restore the body in what it needs in a really healthy way without stressing it out more than it already is. So essentially, to do that, there are 3 different things you want to look at when it comes to consuming carbs. So you want to see if you are carb tolerant. So how is your body? So carb tolerance is how your body utilizes glucose, how glucose is taken up into the cells through insulin, and if it's doing that efficiently. So that's one. So usually people that are carb intolerant or have a carb tolerance issue are people that are pre-diabetic, diabetes, have some insulin resistance. They could have things like PCOS, which is a metabolic issue. And metabolically, they're just not utilizing glucose well. The other people that we see a lot of carb tolerance issues with is people that have been low carb dieting on and off for a long period of time. So they've been under eating carbs for a really, really long time, or if they've been keto for years or things like that, they may have also an issue metabolically with utilizing that glucose and having that process be really super healthy. So if you are somebody that's carb intolerant or have a carb tolerance issue, a blood sugar issue, then there are a couple of things that we may want to work on. First of all, we do hair mineral testing because minerals are these raw materials that actually make your cells more insulin sensitive. So if you don't have the building blocks due to depletion of these raw minerals, things like calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, you are going to have an issue with your cells in and of themselves being sensitive to insulin, and glucose isn't going to readily move into those cells and be utilized appropriately for energy. So we first want to look at this sensitivity, this insulin sensitivity on a mineral level, on a raw material level. During that time, if you are somebody that is struggling with carb intolerance and you do have blood sugar issues, we probably do want to, or you're coming from a history of low carb dieting, probably do want to maintain a lower carb intake while you're building up that insulin sensitivity. So that can be something that's really important. Now, when I say a low carb intake, what I mean from our perspective is, again, the brain needs 130 grams, period. For women, we have higher energy requirements. Because of our processes, our reproductive system, how much stress we're under as the caretakers and nurturers, we have an energy requirement that's much higher. And so we want to take that into consideration. And typically I suggest and recommend a minimum of about 140 to 150 grams of carbs. That would be on the lower side, the lower intake, while we work on the minerals, the building blocks to make your body more tolerant to that insulin sensitivity. So again, if you're coming from a PCOS place, you're coming from a low carb dieting place, you're coming from an insulin resistance place, it may be a good idea to stay on the lower end of your carb intake while you work to make your cells more insulin sensitive. Another way we can do that is actually through sleep. We can do it through building lean muscle mass in mineral balance. Those 3 things combined can actually make a huge difference. And the more we correct and the more you support those systems, you can and should then slowly increase your carb intake to meet your activity level. So the more you're able to be active, the more you're able to train, the more you're able to lift weights, all of those things, your carb intake should slowly increase. But if you are coming from a place, again, low carb dieting, insulin resistance, maybe a PCOS, it may be on a smart move while you're starting to work on those building blocks, staying more in a low carb place. But again, that low carb place, about 140, 150 grams, which may be more carbs than you've ever consumed in the past. But then we also need to work on how you're consuming those carbs, because the way that you're consuming carbs also matter when it comes to glucose, using up that glucose efficiently. So pairing your carbs with protein, that will slow down the digestion and absorption of carbs into your bloodstream, which can then help with big blood sugar spikes, right? And then also protein, when we pair that protein with the carbs, protein actually instigates insulin release. So it will help, that insulin will help usher the glucose into the cells for use. So it's also important that while you're working on those things, if blood sugar is an issue, that you're pairing your carbs with protein, with fat, in order to make that process happen smoothly. And then, like I said, you'll slowly become more carb tolerant over time, and you'll be able to increase your carbs, and should increase your carbs as your energy as your activity level improves. So that's carb tolerance. But then we have this whole other kind of category of women and people that live in a place where we definitely have a metabolic issue with carbs, but also we have a malabsorption and maldigestion of carbohydrates. And a lot of times those two things get lumped together. But if you're somebody that also, along with like your brain fog and energy and hyperglycemic issues and erratic blood sugar, if you have some digestive issues when it comes to carbohydrates, meaning like bloating, diarrhea, constipation, like just general discomfort in your gut, then we do want to also look at carb maldigestion and malabsorption. They are two different things, but like I said, they often get lumped together. So maldigestion of carbohydrates is typically referring to either a genetic component or even like an acquired enzyme deficiency. So the enzymes needed to properly break down those carbohydrates aren't there. And there can be lots of different reasons for that, but that's usually a maldigestion issue. Then you have malabsorption, which carb malabsorption is actually how your carbs are absorbed through your intestinal wall and able to be taken up by organs and tissues to use that energy. So if you're not doing that process well, glucose can sit in the gut and we get a lot of like bacterial overgrowth and dysbiosis and things of that nature. So those two categories also matter. So when we're dealing with carb maldigestion and malabsorption, what we really want to be looking at is not demonizing the carbs, because as I said at the beginning, like carbs are great, carbs are necessary, but we want to look at the underlying reason as to why. And typically for enzymes, being able, if we're looking at digestion, this is the key. So if you're having either absorption or digestion issues, we have to look to support your overall digestion to make sure you're able to properly absorb and utilize those carbs. So for example, I think a lot of us have heard of the enzyme like lactose. So a lot of people have lactose intolerance, which means they're unable to digest that lactose from that carb. But a lot of us as women have enzyme deficiency, for example, in amylase. This is something nobody really talks about, but amylase is actually formed and comes into our system through our salivary glands and our pituitary gland. So when we talk about being and needing to be in rest and digest mode, in that parasympathetic state, in order to properly break down our food, this really includes carbohydrates. You need that amylase in order to break down carbs, to digest them well. That's a really important enzyme. A lot of us are super busy, we're running around, we're rushed, we're not in a parasympathetic state. Our body's not producing those salivary enzymes. If you think about it from a pituitary gland standpoint, pituitary gland is also responsible for your stress hormones and pumping those out. So if your pituitary gland is in the middle and in the process of doing that because you're in a rush state, because you're in a sympathetic go, fight or flight state, it's not going to be prioritizing the enzymes in the parasympathetic state in order to break down and digest that food. So digestion is so important, but on the basic level of actually just experiencing your food, chewing your food, sitting down to eat your food, being able to be in a calm state when you eat your food. those are actually really important for carbohydrates. And a lot of us aren't, and we demonize the carbs, and we cut out the carbs, and we take out the carbs, and it may make us feel better. But again, long term, our body's going to be going through a really stressful process in order to convert that protein and fat into that glucose that our body needs, especially our brain. So we end up in a more depleted, more chronically stressed out state years down the road. So it's better if we can just learn to digest our food appropriately. And then also with malabsorption, if you have leaky gut, if you have something like a SIBO or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, that can really affect the body's ability to, like I said, uptake that glucose into tissues, organs, things of that nature. So you do want to address those things as well. So I think this whole conversation of carbs and should we eat carbs and should we not, carbs in and of themselves are great and needed and necessary. But it's also stupid to ignore the fact that most of us are coming into the conversation having some issues with either digesting, absorbing, or tolerating glucose because we're depleted. We don't have the raw materials, the raw minerals in order to do the job. We're eating and our digestion is kind of all messed up. And our lifestyle is just not appropriate for being able to break down and utilize those carbs and glucose efficiently. So we get a lot of issues. And the solution oftentimes is, oh, we'll just take out the carbs. Oh, go on low FODMAP. Oh, go paleo, go keto. You're going to feel so much better. And that may be true in the short term, but in the long term, we're really feeding that chronic stress. We're really feeding that depletion. We're really feeding all of these things. And we're still not addressing why you weren't responding well to carbs in the first place. So body needs carbs. Body responds well to glucose. It's our preferred source of energy. We want it. We want quick, easy carbs, but sometimes we do need to do some deeper investigation. There's so much more nuance to the carbohydrate conversation than what you're seeing on the internet. So if you're somebody that really feels like carbs you're not doing well with them. So like I said, the brain fog, the hyperglycemia, some bloating, gastrointestinal issues, fatigue, if you're feeling that, especially after you eat carbs, we should have a conversation and really get to the root as to why those things are happening and fix it at that level. And then we work together on your nutrition in order to find that sweet spot where you're getting enough carbs so that your thyroid's working, you're not in a chronic state, you're able to live your life, you're not restricting and causing that stress, and then slowly build that up over time as things improve. So it's a much more nuanced conversation than what's being portrayed on the interweb, of course. So and if you have any questions, if you want to talk about this in more detail, book a call with us. We are accepting new clients right now. We also have our Mineral Revival program, which we'll talk through all this, because one of the keys to actually building up your carb tolerance and your ability to utilize carbs effectively, efficiently, so that your body is doing all the things that it loves to do. Minerals are key foundation for that. So we do that work with our one-on-one clients, but we also do it in the Mineral Revival program. So if you're somebody that's more of prefers to do it yourself, learn on your own, but then get some one-on-one support with like group coaching or results reviews where we walk through your test, that is also an option, and that's ongoing. So 2 options. If you want to talk about those, we'd love to have that conversation. And you can comment on this post and we'll send you a link to book a call. But I hope that helps. Maybe it made you more confused, but in general, this conversation is much more nuanced. So there you go.